Can you beat every major boss in Elden Ring with only shields? Well, yeah, surely it's possible. But how difficult is it for the average human being? Let's find out. To show off my shield skills at the beginning of the stream, I decided not to jump off the cliff, but fight the Grafted Scion. And I actually beat it on my first try. Oh, I died. This gave me the confidence I needed to keep going with the run. I started by collecting a bunch of shields and testing them against Margit, but none of them left me satisfied enough. At this point I remembered something I read a lot online when the game released, so I went for it. It wasn't as easy as people made it out to be, but I did it. I killed the Margit using the jellyfish. Before going on to fight Godrick, I made my way to Arthur's Plateau to pick up the best Ash of War for this run, Shield Crash. Shield Crash allows the player to inflict a ton of stagger to enemies, while also dealing a decent amount of damage. There are two main things that make this Ash of War really strong for this run. The first is that it can be used without having any FP left, albeit for lower damage and stagger. The second is that it can apply status effects relatively fast, since it hits 5 times in a short amount of time. The main shield that I would use this on was a spike shield. I picked it up in Kaled and it has a pretty decent bleed buildup. I went to kill the wolf in the academy and pick up the glintstone wet blade. I could now infuse any shield with frost and deal some more damage through frostbite. I got to use this strategy on Godrick, and although I died a few times, I killed him and pressed onwards. Now I know what you might be thinking. Why use this very average shield against Godrick, when you had this way better shield that inflicts bleed to fight the dog? And it's because I must confess one thing to you all. I wanted to defeat every remembrance boss in the game with a different shield. However, one boss in particular made me go back on these terms and decide it would be better to just use the best shields available for every boss. After a short yogurt break with a good friend of mine, I realized that I was massively underleveled because I was upgrading different shields and buying tons of smithing stones. So I decided to become stronger before trying to fight Radahn. The first step was defeating Rennala, and that wasn't too much of a problem with a frost-infused shield. Although in retrospect, it probably wasn't the smartest decision, since that changes half the damage to magic and Rennala has a lot of magic resistance. She did try to use some illegal moves by the end and summon wolves and a dragon at the same time, but it was too late. In order to beat all the remembrance bosses, you need to complete Ranni's questline. So I went to teach a lesson to Loretta and met up with everybody's favorite character. Then I made my way to Siofra River to face the ancestor spirit. There are two reasons why I decided to go there. The first was that I was thinking that it could easily grant me a bunch of runes to level up my character, and the second was that I thought he dropped a remembrance. Turns out I was wrong on both accounts. This boss was particularly annoying because of how slow and narrow my attacks were. If I target locked him, I would miss like 90% of my attacks because it would always land in between his legs. Only after killing him did I realize that he doesn't drop a remembrance, the Rico ancestor does. I still didn't feel quite ready to face Radahn yet, so I went to fight the Draconic Tree Sentinel instead. I struggled quite a bit, even with the frost and bleed inflicted by this shield, so I had to put on a hat and then I succeeded, easily. I could already access the capital. The first boss of the capital is Godfrey Spirit, and he's completely immune to all the status effects. So I used a little bit of a different strategy to kill him. I actually realized during this fight that as someone that rarely plays with a shield usually, blocking is quite strong, and you couldn't break through my shield stability as long as I didn't greed. The best offense really is a great defense. Also, bonus star points for the ending. I felt ready. I abandoned the idea of defeating every boss with a different shield and challenged Radahn equipped with my spiked shield. The first attempt with this shield went like this. And then the second, like that. and then the third. I was actively getting worse and worse with each attack, but I wasn't going to give up. I would beat him. After farming a few levels, upgrading my shield to plus 17, and making my character look way better than before, it was time to teach Morgott a lesson. It wasn't particularly easy because he is quite fast and my shield attacks are quite slow. Eventually I had to play it a bit safer and stop greeding for hits, and I managed to defeat him. Then I made my way down to my favorite place in the lands between, and got lost for about half an hour. Oh, this is the worst place in the game. It was at the bottom that I met what I thought was Mohg, but he and I are very close, and I know the real version has wings, so it had to be some sort of illusion, and I just dismissed it. I easily parkoured my way down to a new shield I could use, the Fingerprint Stone Shield. It is quite heavy and doesn't have bleed, but once I have enough materials to upgrade it, I will make the switch, since it hits way harder and blocks better than my spiked shield. I went through the invisible walls, showed how skilled my build was to Fiash champions. And somehow we ended up with Leyndell spamming scrolls and refusing to die. I'll come back here in a bit to face Fortisax, but first I have to progress Ranni's questline. On my way to Naturalborn, I met a weird looking enemy, but it had no shield, so it was super easy to beat. What was harder there was the next boss. I had to put my past trauma aside and give it my all. No way I was gonna let him humiliate me again, right? Heal! I died to this boss. Thankfully, I did salvage some of my self-esteem by getting him on the second try. I got the item for Ranni's questline, gave it to her, and picked up the Curse Mark of Death. The next boss on my list was the Fire Giant. I still used the Spike Shield against him, since he has a large HP pool and my damage is very low. I thought Frost and Bleed would help quite a bit. My first attempt showed great promise, until I got one shot. Every attempt after that was longer than 10 minutes, but I just couldn't be consistent enough with dodging these freaking fireballs. A second makeover was required. The fight actually took 12 whole minutes, but I made it through on the first try with this armor. Before burning my maiden, I did pick up a few other ranged shields because I thought it would be the only way to beat Rykard. Unfortunately, they seemed pretty weak. But I did realize something while testing things on him. The lava didn't actually deal too much damage to me. With enough healing, I could just stand in there and walk away. The second issue was the damage. I was not dealing any damage to him. Even by shield crashing into him, the damage was... wow. Yeah, it turns out that he's really weak to Frostbite and Bleed. I did get to second phase, but with no flasks left, I had to refine my plan. So I decided to call it a night and come back to him later. The next day, I made my way through Noxtella, got absolutely outplayed by Blythe, and ran through the Lake of Rot. Astel was next, and it seemed to be immune to Frost, and Bleed was hard to proc, so I finally swapped to the Fingerprint Stone Shield that had been upgraded on the side. And oh boy, it dealt damage. I still got killed by one of the coolest grab attacks in the game, but after figuring out that this shield could also block magic quite effectively, I managed to win. With Astel defeated, nothing stood in the way of me and Ranni getting married. Sorry for the weird armor, this new shield is quite heavy. Immediately after swearing allegiance to one waifu, I went into another stream. Honestly, there isn't much to say about Fortisax. I got hit quite a bit, but his damage is low enough that he's not too much of a menace. I finally burnt my maiden and faced the Godskin duo. This was definitely the hardest boss of the run so far, but at least the music is pretty good. I didn't really have a way of making the fight much easier since I couldn't make them fall asleep with my shields, so it was down to playing safe and not greeding for hits. Ever. I hadn't been using shield counters up until this point since I didn't block too much, but they proved to be surprisingly useful in this fight. They dealt a ton of poise damage, and even though I couldn't riposte with the shield, it gave me some free hits here and there. It took about an hour and a half, but the Godskin duo was finally behind me. Surely I could get some rest now, right? Yeah, Malekith's first phase wasn't too much of a problem. Most of his damage was physical, so I could play it safe and only hit whenever there was a clear window. It was slow, but consistent. Second phase, however. After about half an hour of trying, I got quite close, but I was still struggling with some attacks. Another half an hour passed with no good attempt, until I was getting close to the end. Gideon killed me once, so I showed him the strength of Shield Crash, and I'm not sure he liked it. My damage on Godfrey wasn't great, but since most of his attacks were physical, he couldn't do much. I could even block the fissure he was doing in the ground. He still gave me one of the most stressful endings of any boss so far. But I made it. The final boss was so close. I would become Elden Lord. However, I couldn't bring myself to go in there quite yet. I had unfinished business. First, Rykard. Now that I had more healing with the Blessed You Talisman and the Crimson Burst Crystal Tear, it was basically a stat check. I brainlessly spammed Shield Crash all the way through first phase. I dealt a ton of damage with Frost and Bleed, and even got a stagger because he would sometimes let me Shield Crash in his face. In second phase, I applied the same strategy with a small twist. I had to back off during the skull attack and wait for him to dismiss them. And then I went back at it again. It was quite hard to hit him sometimes, but I kept focusing his little leg and his wound until he got tired and let me win. I got him! Rykard shield only. At the dawn of the final day, I went to Miquella's Halictree and fought Loretta. She was tough, but surprisingly weak to guard counters. Stagger after stagger, I got her, and progressed further. Then I tried to get down to Malenia as fast as possible. You see, there is actually a little speedrun trick to activate the elevator leading to Malenia from up the area. You just have to land right there. Hey, got it.
Heed my words. I am Malenia, Blade of Miquella, and I have never known defeat.
Oh, that's just unfortunate. I died to her for about an hour or so, only reaching phase 2 once. I just wasn't mentally ready. I needed to seek advice from an old friend of mine.
You must abide alone a while.
Well, that made no sense. I think he's gone insane. I have to put an end to his suffering. Mohg is actually one of my favorite bosses in the game, but without the flask upgrade to deal with his nihil, it was quite difficult. Healing was a bit of a problem, but after a few tries, repeatedly slamming my shield with the jump talisman equipped, I was victorious. Okay. Whew. Back to Malenia. Another hour passed and I was getting to her second phase somewhat consistently, but I just couldn't finish her. Another hour later and I lost the last remaining piece of my sanity. Every jump attack that would land right in front of her without connecting. Every time she would catch me on a roll. It took a toll on me, and I snapped. I was starting to become deaf and my performance was not improving, so I went back to normal volume and decided that I needed something else to boost my confidence. I activated Godrick's Great Rune and went back in. I was close. I could taste victory. Unfortunately, a few mistakes and several waterfowl dances later, she was back at almost full HP and bested. I went in a second time, determined that I could do it. 5 hours had passed, but I felt more powerful than ever before. I could now finish the game, and surprisingly, the final fight barely took more than 10 minutes to complete. I don't deserve this kill. It was so sloppy. This is it. The end of the shield-only run. I could finally proudly say that I beat every major boss in Elden Ring, shield only. Oh yeah, I did completely forget about Placidusax until a few days later, so I reloaded my save, ran to him, and got him on the first try. Thank you all for watching. I know this is probably not the hardest challenge you've seen someone do in this game, but I hope you found it entertaining nonetheless. I'm pretty sure there are already a few shield-only runs out there, but some of the ones that I saw were abusing a glitch that was patched in 1.03, so I decided to make my own. Don't hesitate to comment if you have ideas for future challenges, and if you want to participate live, you can join me on Twitch. Have a very nice day.